I'm a senior researcher at Microsoft Station Q at the University of Sydney. I'm working on quantum computing scale-up, how we go from research that's done in an academic lab and transform that into something that we can scale for an industrial technology. Ettore Majorana was a mysterious guy. He was born into a very wealthy family in Rome. He studied from a young age under Enrico Fermi, was one of the street boys that Fermi had. It's a term that has come from the street that they all worked together on. He was extremely productive, although published very little. He published only, I think, 9 academic papers throughout his career, but was known. He traveled around Europe. The 1920s and 1930s was a great time for the growth of quantum theories. He worked with Heisenberg, with Niels Bohr in Copenhagen, and of course Enrico Fermi. The application to our work is that Majorana himself he took the results of the Dirac equation, which describes the creation and annihilation operators that describes all particles in our universe, and then he rewrote them very cleverly. And instead of writing down just creation and annihilation operators, which will give you, for example, an electron and a positron, he wrote them down into their real and imaginary components, and then showed that you can actually just rearrange the mathematics, rearrange these equations, and to get new types of particles. And from that, these particles were, in fact, their own antiparticle, which is quite mysterious in itself. How can a particle be its own antiparticle? What that means from a practical point of view is that it must have no charge. It has no energy because it's its own antiparticle. And in fact, everything about it is zero except for its mass. So it's extremely difficult to detect. Majorana himself, he postulated the existence of this particle in 1937 in a paper. 1938, he took a boat ride and disappeared. And at the time, the thought was he left a note, a departure note, and it was, I guess, inferred from that note that he committed suicide. The importance of his work, though, was not unrecognized. Unrecognized by the government in Italy. There was sort of a very large reward offered by Mussolini himself for any information on Majorana's return. Although his friends and colleagues had thought that he had committed suicide, I think the government in Italy at the time was worried that he'd defected to the Nazis or to Russia. So from 1938, for another 80 years, there was no more real mention of Ettore Majorana or these Majorana particles. The article was published in Italian. It was had a very, very, very small readership. It was not even really mentioned in any textbook on quantum mechanics. So you won't find the existence of this theory of a Majorana particle, a particle that it's its own antiparticle, in any sort of textbook, in university textbook for roughly 80 years. Why would a company like Microsoft go all in on something called a Majorana fermion, or a Majorana zero mode, we like to call it? Well, we have to look a little bit more at the history after those 80 years, and what was proposed and then later realized in the lab is that you could create these Majorana particles or Majorana fermions artificially. So you could engineer them out of materials that we already have and do this in a way that's quite compatible with modern semiconductor engineering. The real motivation, though, is not just that we can make them, that if they are shown to exist and they are their own antiparticle, and then they are expected to obey something called non-abelian statistics. And then what that means is that these particles have a memory of their history. Normally, if you take two particles, you exchange their position, they don't know anything about that. The one on the right is still on the right after they've gone around each other. Particles which would obey non-abelian statistics, like Majoranas, they have a memory of where they've been. And this is something that we call braiding. And this memory can be used for computing. And part of the brilliance of this and why it's really going to be a robust form of computing, we hope, is that because these Majoranas are delocalized particles, they are their own antiparticles, but they are separated in space, is that the information is stored a little bit on one and a little bit on other. And so because they have a memory of where they've been, you can take half of this Majorana and twist it around half of another Majorana. And it doesn't matter the exact path that they take around each other, these two halves of Majoranas. So any small perturbation in this path doesn't matter. It's only the fact that it's been around, just like knotting a rope, not braiding someone's hair. And so that means that it will be very robust against any noise sources. Any quantum system, its lifetime is characterized by its interactions with its environment. And so in order to be useful, we want a quantum system that can do a lot of calculations, so has very small amount of interaction with its environment. That would be one way of looking at it. What a Majorana particle would give us is a computation that means that we can calculate fast. So it interacts with its environment very rapidly, but doesn't decohere, it doesn't lose quantum information. The main advantage of topological quantum computing over what I would call traditional quantum systems is just in the number of qubits that you need to have, so physical qubits that you need to have in order to implement an algorithm that solves a particular problem of a particular difficulty. You can build in topological robustness into regular qubits of other flavors, ion traps, superconducting qubits, dopants in silicon, for example. You can build that the sort of an artificial topological robustness in by adding a lot of other qubits as ancillas to help out the calculation qubit. The hope is with topological quantum computing, the count on the number of ancillas you would need is much, much less. So if we know, for example, we would need 100 logical qubits for solving a particular problem that's currently unsolvable, that's a number that we're aiming for. In a topological quantum computer, you may only need 100 physical qubits, where in a non-topological quantum computer, you may need several thousands or tens of thousands. For error correction, for ancillar properties, exactly. And so just to physically build that is going to be much, much simpler. I think, personally, my feeling is this is a very hard problem. And we should be working on hard problems as a society. So there is a very aggressive timeline, I think, from all commercial entities for reaching certain milestones in quantum computers. Whether we reach them or not, I think it just describes how hard the problem is. And if it was an easy problem, well, probably it's not one we should be working on anyway.